Today's discussion focuses on a very important topic that continues to generate debate among economists, investors, banking observers, and Iraqi dinar followers around the world. The conversation centers around Iraq's long-running struggle with the parallel currency market, the resistance inside parts of the banking system, and growing speculation surrounding a potential restructuring of the Iraqi dinar through policy measures often referred to as revaluation and redenomination, commonly known as deleting the zeros. Now, before we begin, it is important to approach this topic with realism and caution. Discussions about the Iraqi dinar often become highly emotional online, with exaggerated claims and unrealistic expectations spreading very quickly. Our goal here is not to create hype or make promises. Instead, we are going to carefully analyze what these developments could mean from an economic and financial perspective, while separating speculation from actual structural realities inside Iraq's economy. The statement we are analyzing today suggests that old banking networks and entrenched financial interests are facing increasing pressure as Iraq's government and financial authorities attempt to modernize the banking sector and reduce dependence on informal currency markets. According to this view, some traditional banking institutions and financial groups have benefited for years from inefficiencies inside Iraq's currency exchange system, particularly through profits connected to the parallel market exchange rate and cross-border financial flows. To understand why this matters, we first need to explain the difference between Iraq's official exchange rate and the parallel market rate. Iraq operates with an official exchange rate set by the Central Bank of Iraq, but in practice, there has often been a gap between that official value and the rate available in street markets or unofficial exchange channels. This gap creates opportunities for arbitrage, speculation, and in some cases, illicit financial activity. For many years, Iraq's economy has depended heavily on cash transactions and oil revenues. Because of this structure, large amounts of US dollars flow into the Iraqi economy through government spending and foreign currency auctions conducted by the Central Bank of Iraq. These auctions were originally designed to stabilize the dinar and ensure liquidity for imports and trade. However, critics argue that weaknesses in oversight allowed some institutions and actors to exploit the system for personal gain. This is where the issue of banking reform becomes extremely important. Iraq has been under increasing pressure, both domestically and internationally, to improve transparency, modernize financial compliance systems, and reduce money laundering risks. Financial reforms have accelerated in recent years, especially as Iraq works more closely with international financial institutions and attempts to strengthen ties with the global banking system. One major part of this modernization effort involves tighter controls over dollar transactions. Iraqi authorities have introduced electronic transfer systems, stricter verification procedures for foreign currency access, and increased monitoring of banks involved in international transfers. These measures are intended to reduce illegal dollar outflows and restore confidence in Iraq's financial sector. However, reforms of this scale rarely happen without resistance. When long-standing systems change, groups that benefited from the previous structure often push back. That resistance can come from institutions accustomed to operating with minimal oversight, from political actors tied to financial networks, or from businesses dependent on parallel market advantages. The statement claiming that old banks' resistance is being steamrolled reflects the belief that Iraqi authorities are becoming more aggressive in enforcing reforms despite opposition. Whether one agrees with that characterization or not, there is no doubt that Iraq's banking sector is under significant transformation pressure. Now let us discuss the most sensitive part of this conversation, the idea of a meaningful revaluation and redenomination of the Iraqi dinar. First, these are two separate concepts that are often confused online. A revaluation generally refers to an official upward adjustment in the value of a currency relative to foreign currencies. A redenomination, on the other hand, involves changing the face value structure of the currency itself, usually by removing zeros from banknotes to simplify accounting and transactions. For example, if a country removes 3 zeros from its currency, 100 old units might become 1 new unit. This does not automatically make citizens wealthier overnight, because prices, wages, and financial balances are adjusted proportionally. Redenomination is usually an administrative and psychological reform designed to simplify economic activity and improve public confidence after long periods of inflation or currency instability. Countries around the world have used redenomination at different points in history. In some cases, it was successful when combined with broader economic reforms and monetary discipline. In other cases, it failed because underlying structural problems remained unresolved. In Iraq's case, discussions about deleting the zeros have existed for many years. Iraqi officials have periodically mentioned the possibility as part of a long-term monetary reform strategy. The basic idea is that Iraq's large denomination currency structure reflects decades of inflation, sanctions, conflict, and economic disruption. Simplifying the currency could theoretically make accounting, banking transactions, and digital payments more efficient. However, implementing such a reform is extremely complex. It requires public confidence, political stability, banking readiness, secure monetary systems, and careful coordination between government institutions and the central bank. What makes today's discussion different is the suggestion that monetary reform may be becoming less of an optional modernization project and more of a structural necessity tied to Iraq's broader economic survival strategy. That argument is based on several important factors. First, Iraq is attempting to transition toward a more modern banking economy with greater digitalization and reduced reliance on physical cash. Large cash-based economies often struggle with tax collection, corruption oversight, and financial transparency. Moving toward electronic systems allows governments to monitor transactions more effectively and integrate with international financial standards. Second, Iraq wants to strengthen confidence in the dinar itself. Currency stability is deeply connected to public trust. If citizens prefer holding US dollars over local currency, it weakens monetary sovereignty and limits the effectiveness of domestic policy. Encouraging greater use of the dinar inside Iraq's economy remains a major policy objective. Third, Iraq's leadership understands that attracting foreign investment requires financial credibility. International investors generally prefer transparent banking systems, predictable exchange rate mechanisms, and stable regulatory environments. Financial reforms are therefore tied not only to domestic economic management, but also to Iraq's long-term development ambitions. When supporters of dinar reform talk about structural survival, they are essentially arguing that Iraq cannot fully modernize its economy while maintaining outdated financial practices and fragmented currency systems. In that sense, banking reform, exchange rate management, and currency restructuring become interconnected issues rather than isolated policy discussions. At the same time, it is important to remain balanced and realistic. Even if Iraq continues implementing aggressive reforms, that does not automatically mean a dramatic overnight increase in the dinar's international value. Currency values are influenced by many factors, including foreign reserves, inflation, productivity, oil revenues, political stability, investor confidence, trade balances, and central bank credibility. Iraq does possess some important economic strengths. The country holds significant oil reserves, strategic geographic positioning, and a relatively young population. Rising oil revenues in recent years have improved government finances and strengthened foreign currency reserves. These factors provide Iraq with greater monetary flexibility compared to some economies facing severe crises. However, Iraq also faces major challenges. Political fragmentation, infrastructure gaps, unemployment pressures, corruption concerns, and dependence on oil revenues continue to create vulnerabilities. Sustainable currency strength requires diversified economic growth, not simply higher oil prices or temporary financial inflows. For Iraqi Dinar followers, this means expectations should remain grounded in economic fundamentals rather than emotional speculation. Real monetary reform, if it happens, would likely be gradual, carefully managed, and tied to broader structural changes rather than sudden wealth creation narratives often promoted online. In the short term, ongoing banking reforms could create periods of volatility and adjustment inside Iraq's financial system. Tighter controls on dollar access may temporarily affect liquidity conditions in local markets. Businesses accustomed to operating through informal channels may face disruptions as compliance requirements increase. Exchange rate pressures between official and parallel markets could also continue during transitional periods. At the same time, these reforms may strengthen Iraq's long-term financial credibility if implemented successfully. Improved banking transparency can increase international trust, reduce financial leakages, and encourage more stable investment environments. Over time, stronger institutions generally support stronger currencies, although the process can take years rather than months. One key issue to watch moving forward is how effectively Iraqi authorities balance reform with stability. Rapid financial changes can create public anxiety if not communicated properly. Citizens need confidence that reforms are designed to improve economic conditions rather than create hardship. This is why central bank communication and public trust become extremely important during periods of monetary transition. Another important factor is regional geopolitics. Iraq operates within a highly sensitive regional environment where economic relationships, trade flows, sanctions policies, and political alliances all influence financial conditions. Changes in regional trade dynamics or international banking regulations can affect Iraq's ability to stabilize and modernize its monetary system. We should also discuss the role of technology in this transformation. Iraq has been expanding digital payment systems and encouraging electronic banking adoption. This may seem like a technical detail, but it is actually central to the future of Iraq's financial system. Modern digital infrastructure reduces dependence on physical cash, improves transaction traceability, and strengthens regulatory oversight. As digital banking expands, authorities gain greater visibility into financial flows, making it harder for unregulated markets to dominate currency activity. In many ways, the push toward electronic finance represents a broader effort to bring Iraq's economy into closer alignment with international banking standards. For ordinary Iraqi citizens, the success of these reforms will ultimately be judged by practical outcomes rather than policy announcements. People care about purchasing power, job opportunities, stable prices, reliable banking services, and economic security. If reforms improve daily economic life, public confidence in the financial system may gradually strengthen. For international observers and dinar watchers, patience and realism remain essential. Currency reform is not a magic solution. Even when countries successfully modernize their monetary systems, the process is usually slow, technical, and closely managed by central banks and government institutions. It is also important to remember that redenomination itself does not automatically create wealth. If Iraq were to remove zeros from the currency in the future, the purpose would likely be administrative efficiency and monetary modernization rather than instant gains for currency holders. Many misunderstandings online come from confusing redenomination mechanics with speculative expectations about massive currency appreciation. That said, meaningful improvements in Iraq's banking system and economic governance could still have positive implications for long-term currency stability. Stronger institutions, better transparency, disciplined monetary policy, and diversified economic growth generally contribute to healthier national currencies over time. The phrase, structural survival, in today's statement reflects a growing recognition that Iraq's economy may be approaching a point where deeper reforms are becoming unavoidable. Maintaining outdated systems indefinitely could limit Iraq's ability to compete economically, integrate globally, and stabilize domestic markets. In many developing and post-conflict economies, there comes a moment when gradual adjustments are no longer enough and more comprehensive modernization becomes necessary. Iraq may be entering such a phase, particularly as younger generations demand better economic opportunities and as international financial standards continue evolving. Still, caution is warranted. Large-scale financial reforms carry risks as well as opportunities. Poor execution, political instability, or insufficient public preparation could create unintended consequences. This is why central banks usually move carefully when discussing major currency reforms. For now, the most important signals to monitor include continued banking modernization efforts, exchange rate stability measures, foreign reserve levels, anti-money laundering enforcement, growth in digital payment systems, and broader economic diversification initiatives. If Iraq can sustain reform momentum while maintaining financial stability, the country could strengthen its long-term economic foundation considerably. But success will depend not only on policy announcements, but also on consistent implementation, institutional discipline, and public confidence. As always, viewers should be cautious about sensational claims circulating online regarding guaranteed revaluation dates, overnight wealth scenarios, or secret financial resets. Responsible financial analysis requires evidence, context, and realistic expectations. Iraq's economic future is important and potentially promising, but it remains tied to complex political, institutional, and global economic factors. In conclusion, today's discussion highlights the growing pressure on Iraq's traditional financial structures as banking reforms accelerate and authorities attempt to reduce dependence on parallel market dynamics. The idea of revaluation and redenomination continues to attract attention because it represents more than just currency mechanics. For many analysts, it symbolizes Iraq's broader struggle to modernize its economy, strengthen financial sovereignty, and integrate more effectively into the global financial system. Whether these reforms eventually lead to significant monetary restructuring remains uncertain, but the direction of travel appears increasingly focused on transparency, modernization, and institutional reform. That process may be difficult and gradual, but it could play a major role in shaping Iraq's economic future over the coming years. Thank you for watching Iraqi Dinar News. If you appreciate balanced, responsible, and factual coverage of Iraqi dinar developments and Iraq's economy, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for future updates. And as always, please remember that this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only, and should not be considered financial, investment, or trading advice.